They called it a community lake. He called it stolen land. When 60 neighbors stormed his dock and claimed history as their right, he didn't argue. He vanished the water. Now the lake is gone. The mud is rising, and the war for truth, land, and power has only just begun.
I bought this land for the silence, the kind that hums in your ears when the world finally shuts up. 12 acres of trees, breeze, and water, tucked just outside the chaotic sprawl of Atlanta. My little retreat after years of noise. Both the city kind and the emotional kind. When my wife passed, I didn't just need space. I needed to forget that people could get close enough to hurt you. So I bought this property at a foreclosure auction. The previous owners had gone bankrupt, trying to develop it into a luxury wedding venue. Complete with a converted quarry pond, they tried to pass off as a private lake. Their debt was my opportunity. I scooped it up for far less than market value, had the boundaries surveyed down to the inch, and made sure it was crystal clear. That water, that pier, that ragged little piece of heaven, it was mine. I rebuilt the dock myself, plank by plank. I posted private property, no trespassing. Signs around the perimeter, not for show, for truth. I didn't want trouble. I wanted to drink coffee on my pier at 6 in the morning, barefoot and alone. And for a while, that's exactly what I got. Until the letters started. The first one was polite, from the Willow Grove Homeowners Association. A standard HOA welcome, even though I wasn't part of the neighborhood. It opened with a dear neighbor and ended with a request to coordinate lake usage rights with the community committee. I laughed, tossed it in the trash, and figured someone just didn't do their homework. The second letter wasn't so friendly. This one came certified, a strongly worded notice accusing me of restricting historic community access to Willow Lake. Apparently, my little pond, which, I remind you, I own, had traditionally served the residents of Willow Grove for recreational and community purposes. They cited a laughable clause from their bylaws about shared natural assets. Bylaws that had as much legal bearing on me as a grocery store coupon. I didn't respond. Figured they'd get bored. They didn't. A few days later, I came home from running errands to find about 60 people. Yes, 60, gathered on my dock. Not near it. Not adjacent to it. On it. Lawn chairs, coolers, some guy in cargo shorts grilling bratwursts. I thought it was a wedding at first. Turns out it was a community town hall. On my property. I parked halfway down the gravel drive and walked up slow, more confused than angry at first. A woman with short blonde hair, posture like a steel beam, spotted me from across the clearing. She marched over in yoga pants and authority. "You must be Mr. Weston," she said, offering a hand she didn't want me to shake so much as submit to. "I'm Camille Thompson, president of the Willow Grove HOA." "Get off my pier," I said. No handshake. She blinked, smile flickering like a power outage. "We're just holding our monthly neighborhood meeting. We've always done it here." "You've done it on my land? Without permission?" "Oh, this lake has always been a shared space," she said. "We assumed you understood the tradition when you purchased the property. It's been used by our community for decades." "Then your community's been trespassing for decades," I said, walking past her toward the dock. Someone had dragged a fold-out table over the corner of the planks. Kids were running near the edge. One man gave me a thumbs up like I was the event host. "Sir, we're not looking for confrontation," Camille said, following close behind. "You may own the parcel, technically, but access to natural bodies of water has precedent." "Ma'am," I said, turning slowly, If you don't remove everyone from my property in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to call the sheriff and have them help you find the exit." "You're being hostile," she said, with that condescending tone only people in power use when they realize they're not. "There's no need to escalate. We're just trying to preserve a bit of community culture. No one is damaging anything." "Your grill is literally melting one of my dock planks," I said. She glanced past me. "We'll be out soon. It's just a quick gathering." I didn't wait. I pulled out my phone and called the sheriff. 20 minutes later, a deputy named Reynolds showed up. He was polite, professional, and clearly uncomfortable. Turns out he'd grown up in Willow Grove. But even he couldn't deny the documents I handed him: deed, plat map, survey results, with GPS-stamped perimeters. It was airtight. Camille tried to argue. Reynolds gave her a smile like a teacher telling a child it's nap time and asked everyone very calmly to leave. There were some groans, a few glares in my direction. One guy muttered something about lake Nazis. I resisted the urge to shove him in the water. By the time they were all gone, the dock looked like the aftermath of a tailgate party. Crushed plastic cups, ketchup stains, a forgotten toddler sandal. Camille was the last to leave. She walked past me with her head high, but not before leaning in and whispering, "You may have the deed, but we have the community." Then she was gone. I stood alone on my pier, my peace in ruins, my coffee long cold. And that was the day I realized this wasn't just about property lines. It was war. The silence didn't come back after that day, not even close. Instead, the lake started making noise without making a sound. Phones buzzing, screens lighting up, whispers spreading faster than ripples on water. I didn't need to be on social media to feel it, but curiosity got the better of me by the next morning. When I searched my address, I found my name attached to headlines I had never asked for. A local online paper had run a story titled something like "Homeowner Blocks Community Lake Access." No mention of trespassing, no mention of private property, just a carefully framed narrative about a lone landowner locking out families. The comments were worse. People I had never met were suddenly experts on my intentions. Greedy, anti-community, power-hungry. One woman wrote that I was hoarding water like a Bond villain. That one almost made me laugh, if it hadn't been followed by dozens of angry replies agreeing with her. Then came the hashtag. Someone had decided to call the pond Willow Lake, a name I had never used and never approved. And suddenly, there were posts demanding it be saved. Save Willow Lake. Drone photos appeared online, taken from angles that could only have come from inside my property line. That was when irritation tipped into something colder. I installed additional cameras the same week, not because I was scared, but because I was done being polite. The HOA didn't reach out directly at first. Instead, they let the pressure build through third parties. A reporter knocked on my gate one afternoon, asking if I had anything to say to the community. I told him the same thing I told everyone else. I owned the land, I paid for it, and no one had permission to be there. He nodded sympathetically and still managed to write an article that made me sound like I was fencing off oxygen. Things escalated fast after that. I left town for 3 days for work. Just 3. A routine site inspection in Alabama. Nothing dramatic. When I pulled back onto my gravel drive late Sunday evening, my headlights caught something that didn't belong. Cars. Dozens of them. Parked crookedly near the tree line, like they'd arrived in a hurry and didn't care how it looked. The music hit me next. Bass heavy, echoing across the water. My water. I walked down toward the lake and felt my jaw tighten with every step. Tents had been set up along the shoreline. Someone had strung cheap solar lights between trees. There was a bonfire near the dock, dangerously close to the planks I had rebuilt myself. People were drinking, laughing, swimming. A full-blown party, like my absence had been an invitation. No one asked if they could be there. No one even looked guilty. I stood in the shadows for a moment, watching strangers celebrate on land they didn't own, and something inside me went very quiet. I didn't yell. I didn't confront anyone. I turned around, walked back to the house, and checked the security feeds. The cameras had caught everything: cars arriving in waves, people tearing down my signs. One man actually saluted the camera and flipped it off. At least 20 individuals clearly identifiable. Faces, license plates, timestamps. It was almost thoughtful of them. By morning, they were gone. They left behind trash, burned grass, broken boards on the edge of the dock, and a greasy stain where someone had dragged a grill across the planks. I called the sheriff again. A different deputy showed up this time. He took notes, nodded, and told me what I already knew. Unless I wanted to press individual charges and track people down one by one, it would likely be treated as a civil matter. That afternoon, the HOA finally spoke openly. Their vice president, a man named Robert Scott, a local attorney according to his own bio, appeared on a regional news segment. He spoke calmly, confidently, like someone used to being believed. He said the association was exploring historical access rights and hinted at something called a prescriptive easement. He suggested the lake might qualify as a shared community resource due to decades of informal use. I didn't argue. I didn't issue statements. I didn't comment online. Instead, I called the Department of Natural Resources. 2 weeks later, I filed paperwork for a full pond reclamation project. Erosion control, drainage improvement, environmental restoration, everything by the book. Perfectly legal, perfectly within my rights. The irony didn't hit them immediately, but it would. They noticed on a Monday. It took a while for them to understand what was happening, the way a frog doesn't notice the water getting hotter. But I knew the signs, the hum of diesel engines, the thump of ground stabilizers, the big orange machines pulling up next to the pond like they'd come to end summer itself. The first pump went in that morning, along the eastern bank. Not loud, not flashy, just steady, industrial, and deeply ominous. A work crew in high-vis vests set up orange fencing, posted warning signs, and began clearing sediment from the edge. One of them wore a Georgia DNR badge. Another had a clipboard with my name at the top of the permit. By noon, the water level had dropped just enough for people to start panicking. The HOA hadn't contacted me in weeks. Not directly, anyway. But the silence broke in full force when Camille Thompson, yes, that Camille, showed up at the edge of the clearing in a linen blouse and a look that could slice granite. She didn't cross the line. She just stood there, watching the pump hose gulping water like a thirsty beast. "You're draining it," she said flatly. "I'm reclaiming the wetland," I said, without turning. "Perfectly legal." "You can't do this." "I already am." By sunset, the rumors had mutated into full-blown hysteria. The next morning, 2 local reporters and 1 guy with a drone hovered outside the property line. I ignored them. The water kept dropping, slow but steady. By Wednesday, the lake had lost more than a foot. The shoreline looked sickly and cracked in the heat. Dead fish began appearing along the muddy banks, the result of poor oxygenation, according to the biologist on site. I felt a little bad about the fish, but not that bad. That Thursday, I came out with my coffee to find a protest forming on the now exposed lake bed. They were holding signs, actual hand-painted signs, and wading ankle-deep in mud like they were reenacting some kind of post-apocalyptic river dance. Save Willow Lake! Let the kids swim! HOA equally community, not control. The last one confused me. I wasn't the one trying to control anyone. I was the one asking to be left the hell alone. I stayed by the dock and watched as the crowd swelled to about 20 people. Camille was there, arms crossed, flanked by a handful of retirees and some young couple with a golden retriever. They didn't dare step onto my property, but they made sure their presence was felt. Someone with a Bluetooth speaker blasted protest folk music. Another was filming the whole thing on Instagram Live. That afternoon, my mailbox was stuffed with letters, not just from the HOA this time, but from individual residents. Some angry, some pleading, a few oddly poetic. One woman compared the pond to the heartbeat of the neighborhood. Another told me her kids learned to fish there and begged me not to poison their memories. No mention of the broken dock, or the trash, or the party they threw while I was gone. What surprised me was a folded note with no name, just a handwritten line on yellow paper. They always knew it wasn't theirs. Don't let them gaslight you. I didn't know who wrote it, but I pinned it to my fridge. Then came the news story that tried to frame me as an environmental threat. A slick, well-produced segment that claimed I was destroying a fragile ecosystem out of spite. They showed drone footage of the drying lake bed and cut to a 10-year-old in rain boots looking mournful while holding a toy boat. They brought on Robert Scott, the HOA's favorite mouthpiece, to talk about the spiritual cost to the community. He actually said, spiritual cost. That was rich, coming from the man who'd once grilled bratwursts on my pier without permission. But then Robert said something that caught my attention. We're exploring legal avenues to dispute Mr. Weston's claim of sole ownership. There may be a case for shared use or historical access rights. We're not ruling out formal action. There it was. It wasn't about fish or kids or fragile ecosystems. It was about control. They'd invaded. I'd responded. And now they were gearing up for war. Not with torches and pitchforks, but with paperwork, court dates, and clever phrases like prescriptive easement. Fine. Let them try. I already had someone in mind, someone who hated HOA bullies more than I did. Her name was Maya Trent, and she had teeth. Hiring Maya Trent felt like arming a bear trap. I met her in a dim, over-air-conditioned office above a pawn shop in Roswell. No receptionist, no potted plants, just framed court documents on the wall like hunting trophies, each one a case she'd won against different HOAs across the state. One of them had a gold seal and a handwritten note from a judge. Ms. Trent, you are a menace to organized tyranny. Well done. She glanced at the manila folder in her hand, the one containing photos of my broken dock, screenshots of the online threats, letters from the HOA, and a printed copy of Robert Scott's Spiritual Cost interview. So, she said, flipping through the stack, you didn't just poke the hornet's nest. You set it on fire and replaced it with a speaker playing Nickelback. I didn't want trouble, I said. They always say that, she replied, not unkindly. But now that you've got it, let's make them regret it. That was the beginning of something beautiful. Maya didn't just prepare for court. She strategized like a war general. First, we filed a counterclaim. Trespassing, property damage, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Then, we submitted a formal cease and desist to the HOA, putting them on notice for further harassment. The cherry on top? Maya also filed a motion with the county zoning board to clarify and record burn the boundaries of my land as exclusive use recreational property, locking out any chance of them later trying to argue ambiguity. Her plan was simple: show them the legal equivalent of a flamethrower and let them decide if they wanted to step closer. But they didn't back down. Instead, HOA President Camille and her shadow puppet lawyer, Robert Scott, doubled down with their own lawsuit. They filed in Superior Court, claiming prescriptive easement via historical communal use. I expected that. Maya expected it. What we didn't expect was how sloppy they'd be about it. For starters, the evidence they attached was laughable. Photos of birthday parties on the pier, kids fishing in the 90s, even an old scan of a community picnic flyer from 2009. None of which mentioned my property or any permissions granted. Worse for them, some of it actually helped Secretary our tilfracted case. One photo showed a giant banner that read, "Annual HOA Cookout, hosted by the Greens, Lot 17, which was located on the opposite side of the lake. Their own documentation proved that the pier wasn't part of common grounds. Then Maya found the real gem. Tucked into the HOA's attachments was a scanned neighborhood plat from 22 years ago, which they claimed proved the lake was a shared feature. But the plat had been edited, clumsily. The lake outline was highlighted with a different font and overlay than the rest of the document. Maya compared it to the original version filed with the county, and sure enough, the unedited one showed a dotted boundary line that stopped before the lake. They forged a document, she said, with a smile that could curdle milk. We filed a motion to strike and a formal complaint. At this point, things started to spiral. Not for us, but for them. The county court scheduled a preliminary hearing. And Maya told me to wear something unthreatening but expensive. I showed up in jeans and a button-down. She showed up in heels and war paint. Robert tried to start the proceedings with some weak appeal to shared community values. Maya interrupted him halfway through his monologue, waving a stack of printed emails. "Your Honor," she said, "I have here documented communications in which Mr. Scott, acting as counsel for the HOA, continued to contact my client after a cease and desist order was filed, including this gem, an email where he refers to my client as, quote, a squatter in a house he didn't build and a pond he didn't earn." The judge looked over his glasses at Robert like he'd farted in church. "I assume you'll have something more factual for the actual hearing?" the judge asked dryly. Robert turned a shade of purple that didn't seem medically sustainable. When we exited the courthouse, I thought that might have been enough. I figured they'd lick their wounds and try to settle. I was wrong. That night, someone dumped a wheelbarrow full of sand across my driveway entrance. Just sand. Nothing else. I guessed it was supposed to be symbolic, like, "You killed our beach. We'll bury your car." I installed motion floodlights and set the cameras to trigger alerts to my phone. Maya told me not to engage, not to react emotionally. "Let them keep doing dumb things," she said. "The more they act like this, the better it looks for us." It kept getting better. One of the neighbors, a retired CPA named Jim, called me out of the blue a few days later. Said he was ashamed of how things had spiraled, that he remembered when the lot was sold and it was always known to be privately owned. "They act like that lake was part of the HOA," he told me. "But back in 2005, when I joined, they tried to include it in the common grounds and got HOA denied by the county." He faxed over a copy of the meeting minutes from that hearing. It was gold. Maya practically salivated when I brought it to her office. They knew. They've always known. They're not confused. They're just entitled. By the end of that week, we had enough evidence to bury their easement claim 6 feet under the dried lake bed. But Maya wasn't satisfied with just winning. She wanted blood. So we filed an amended claim. Not just damages, punitive damages. We were going to make them pay. By the time the court date rolled around, the lake was a memory. The basin that once shimmered in the sun now looked like a sunken battlefield, cracked mud, water lines etched like scars, and the remnants of a party banner half buried in clay. I hadn't bothered removing it. It felt poetic. Inside the courthouse, things were less poetic and more tactical. The gallery was full. I recognized some of them. HOA board members, bitter neighbors, a couple of teenagers who'd once tried to light fireworks on my dock, now wearing ties like they belonged in a church choir. Local news crews had taken seats in the back row, quietly setting up their tripods. The story had become a spectacle. I wore a gray suit I hadn't touched since my wife's funeral. It still fit. Barely. Maya stood beside me like a surgeon about to crack open a chest. Cold, focused, ruthless. Robert Scott and Camille Thompson sat on the other side of the room, looking like they'd just chugged 2 gallons of confidence. That wouldn't last. Opening statements were standard. Robert tried to wax poetic about generational use and communal identity. He even pointed to the audience, calling them the true stewards of Willow Lake. The judge, to her credit, looked unimpressed. Maya didn't bother with drama. She stood, adjusted her sleeves, and said, "This is a case about entitlement, trespass, and the deliberate abuse of power by a private organization against a legal property owner. Today, we'll show not only the facts, but the intent and the consequences of ignoring the law when it no longer suits you." And then it began. Maya called me first. I testified to how I'd bought the land legally, presented the deed, showed the property boundaries, explained the installation of signs, and described the repeated invasions. I kept my tone even. No theatrics, just facts. Then Maya brought out the footage. On the screens, we played video clips from my security system. The party on my pier, kids diving into the water, Robert standing on my dock giving an impromptu speech during the infamous community cookout. He looked smug in the video. He looked nauseous in person. Next, Maya introduced the forged plat map. The HOA had submitted, and side by side with the county's certified original, even a blindfolded judge could see the difference. She didn't stop there. We also have a sworn affidavit from county records staff confirming this edit did not originate from any official government entity, she added, before sliding the next document across the table. And here's a scanned copy of HOA meeting minutes from 2005, where the board's motion to annex the lake into common grounds was rejected by county zoning due to lack of jurisdiction. Robert tried to object. The judge overruled him. But the real nail came from Jim. When he walked into the courtroom, I saw Robert's jaw clench. Jim, cardigan, glasses, and all, may have looked like your average friendly grandpa, but the man had kept receipts. He took the stand and calmly explained how the HOA had attempted to pass a vote to rebrand the lake as community property, despite knowing full well it was never part of the HOA's deeded parcels. He also admitted they'd been advised against continued use of the pier more than once over the years, and that Camille had led the charge to test the limits. She said, and I quote, Jim told the court, "If he won't share the lake, we'll just outlast him." Camille's face turned to stone. Her attorney leaned over and whispered something, but her eyes never moved off Jim. After a short break, the defense tried to recover. They called a few residents, a woman who cried on the stand about her childhood memories on the lake, another who insisted the vibe of the neighborhood had been ruined by legal aggression. Maya didn't object. She let it happen. Then, when it was her turn to cross-examine, she asked one simple question. Did you have permission from the landowner to use the lake at any time in the past 2 years? They all said no. Robert's closing statement tried to pivot toward healing and rebuilding community trust. Maya's was cleaner. No one in this courtroom is arguing against memories. We're here because my client's legal rights were ignored. His property was violated, and when he defended it, he was harassed, defamed, and retaliated against. The HOA knew the lake wasn't theirs. They just didn't care. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found in our favor. Honnêtement, all consent. Damages were awarded for trespassing, vandalism, slander, and the emotional stress I'd documented over months. But that wasn't all. Maya had gone for punitive damages, and the jury gave them to us, over $200,000 in total compensation. That didn't include court costs, which the HOA was also ordered to pay. The judge added a cherry on top. The HOA was forbidden from making any claim over my property ever again. Permanent injunction. Immediate effect. Camille didn't speak. She didn't even look at me. Robert packed up his papers like a man folding a bad poker hand. Maya patted me on the shoulder and said, "They'll feel this one." As we left the courthouse, the cameras flashed and microphones were shoved in my face. I didn't say much, just one sentence. It's my land. That was the beginning and the end of it. You'd think winning a lawsuit like that would feel like fireworks. It didn't. Not right away. It felt like standing on the shore after a storm. The wind gone, the trees still leaning sideways, the smell of something scorched hanging in the air. The victory was real, the compensation substantial. But it didn't bring back what I'd lost. My peace wasn't on any court docket. Still, the silence returned, slowly. Not the same as before, but quieter than it had been in months. The first thing I did was repair the pier, not out of nostalgia, out of spite. I hired a team, paid them in full, and told them to rebuild it stronger than before. Steel supports, water-sealed planks, motion-activated lighting. They finished it in under 2 weeks, and it looked like it could survive a hurricane. But the lake remained dry. Technically, I could have filled it again. The pumps could be reversed, the inflows reconnected, the water level restored. But I didn't. Not yet. Something in me resisted the idea of giving them back the view they'd used like a rental. I'd reclaimed every legal inch. Now I wanted to reshape what that land meant. So I filed a new zoning application. Private Ecological Restoration Zone. That's bureaucratic lingo for I'm turning it into a nature reserve. No boats, no swimming, no parties, just dry land and native plants. Maybe a walking path for people I invited. The former lake bed became my canvas. I hired a local landscaping firm and told them to make it wild, not manicured. We planted native grasses, low brush, and a cluster of slow-growing hardwoods. I brought in bee boxes and bird feeders. By the end of summer, dragonflies hovered where paddleboards once drifted, and herons strutted through the tall grass like they owned the place. Neighbors watched the transformation like I was painting over a community mural. I ignored them. The HOA, stripped of power, shuffled into silence. After the verdict, their president, Camille, officially resigned. Her farewell email didn't include my name, just a vague statement about stepping away for personal reasons. Robert Scott disappeared from the legal scene entirely. Word was the state bar opened an ethics investigation. He'd taken a leave from his firm. I didn't ask where he went. Then came the letters. Apologies this time. Some were short. Didn't know the full story. Sorry. Others longer, full of regret and awkward self-awareness. Most of them came from residents who had followed the crowd, not led it. One woman included a gift card to Home Depot with hers. I used it to buy native wildflower seed. The only apology that really mattered came from Jim. He walked up my drive one Sunday morning holding a small box. Inside was a photo of the lake from 2 decades ago, with a handwritten note on the back. It was never ours. It was just beautiful. Sorry for forgetting the difference. I shook his hand and invited him to sit. We started talking that morning and didn't stop for hours. He told me stories about the early days of Willow Grove, before the HOA got teeth. Back when neighbors helped each other move furniture, not write complaints. He sounded sad, like someone who'd watched a good thing rot from the inside. Later that week, the new interim HOA board, a group of younger residents who had kept their heads down during the drama, approached me formally. They asked if I'd be willing to serve as a community advisor. Not part of the board, they clarified quickly. Just someone who can give perspective when things get heated. I laughed. Actually laughed. But then I said yes. Not for them. For myself. Being right had been satisfying. Being useful felt better. By autumn, the old lake had become a sort of private park. I built a small pavilion on the north end with solar lighting and weatherproof benches. I invited Jim and a few of the neighbors who had written me sincere letters. Nothing big, just a shared meal, some beer, and stories around a portable fire pit. At one point, a kid asked if he could walk around the old lake path. I asked if his parents had ever trashed my pier. He didn't even know what I meant. That made me feel better. I handed him a flashlight and said, "Stay on the trail." The next morning, I woke up to find someone had cleaned the graffiti. Off the old HOA sign at the subdivision entrance. No one admitted to it. I had a guess. People didn't change overnight. But they noticed. And that was a start. 6 months later, I was drinking lemonade on my pier. Yeah, that pier. The one that used to be a battlefield, then a crime scene, then an exhibit in a civil lawsuit. Now it was just a quiet place again. No boats, no music, no HOA meetings disguised as potlucks. Just me, a folding chair, and the kind of silence you have to earn. The lake still wasn't a lake. It had become something better. A place with boundaries. There were paths now, subtle trails cut through grass and saplings, with little wooden signs that said things like, "This way, kindly," or "Nature doesn't need HOA approval." That one made Jim laugh every time he visited. Jim came by often. He'd taken to calling himself the Ghost of Willow Grove and narrated local gossip like a retired newscaster. His visits became a kind of ritual. He'd bring over thermoses of coffee, talk about native species, and shake his head whenever someone mentioned the old board. Camille never came back. Robert? Last I heard, he was consulting for some obscure property rights forum out in Arizona. One of those places where they say things like sovereign citizenship. A little too earnestly. I didn't lose sleep over him. The new HOA board kept their distance. Respectful, professional, even, dare I say, neighborly. They ran a neighborhood newsletter now. It had gardening tips, crime watch alerts, and, for the first time, a section titled, "Respecting Property Boundaries. Know before you stroll." I read it every month. I even submitted an article once. One Sunday afternoon, I noticed a familiar truck coming up the drive. An old, dull red Ford pickup. beat to hell, but still moving. I squinted. The driver parked, stepped out, and stood for a moment, as if checking if gravity still worked. It was Robert. He was thinner, less smug, no tie, just a tired guy holding a white envelope. I didn't say anything, just watched him walk over to the edge of the pier. He stopped exactly 3 inches before the private property sign and held the envelope out like it was radioactive. "I'm not here to start anything," he said. I took the envelope and opened it. Inside, a folded sheet with typed text. 43 names. The residents of Willow Grove. The ones who'd trespassed, protested, or just stood by and watched. Below the names was a short paragraph. "We recognize that we acted without respect, and we apologize for the harm caused. Thank you for protecting what was yours. We understand it now." I looked at him. He didn't look like a lawyer anymore. He looked like a man who'd spent 6 months rethinking every decision he made while staring at a dried-up lake. I didn't forgive him. Not really. But I nodded. "Lemonade?" I asked, lifting the pitcher beside me. He hesitated, then stepped past the sign, slowly, like it might bite, and sat on the opposite bench. We drank in silence, watching the wind ripple through golden grass where water used to be. After a while, I said, "You know, there's a heron that comes by around sunset, hangs out near the East Trail." He nodded. "I've seen it, from the other side." We sat like that for a while. 2 men, 1 pier, and a whole lot of history between them. As he stood to leave, I pointed at the new signpost I'd added the week before. It hung at the start of the pier, carved into dark wood. "Private property. Kindness welcome." He read it, then looked back at me with a faint smile. "Fair enough," he said. I watched his truck drive off, the gravel crunching under his tires until the trees swallowed him up again. When I turned back toward the pier, I saw Jim approaching from the trail, carrying a cooler. "Barbecue?" he called out. "I brought ribs and beer, the good kind this time." I laughed and waved him in. Behind him, kids ran down the trail with flashlights, their voices echoing across the basin, chasing fireflies and shadows. They'd never known the lake as it was, and maybe that was the point. They wouldn't grow up thinking they were entitled to someone else's peace. They'd just remember the place where summer always started, on a pier where kindness mattered more than ownership. And that was enough.
This story starts with silence and ends with earned peace. But in between, we witness the brutal transformation of one man's sanctuary into a battleground of control, entitlement, and the slow, grinding fight for autonomy. At its core, this isn't about a pond or a pier, it's about boundaries. Who gets to define them, enforce them, ignore them? The protagonist buys land legally, documents it precisely, posts clear signs, and just wants solitude. Yet from the moment the HOA first knocks, with faux-friendly letters and assumptions of community tradition, the real battle begins. Why do organizations like HOAs believe tradition overrides deeded ownership? Why is individual resistance so often labeled hostility? Camille and the HOA don't test the legal limits. They trample them. From unauthorized gatherings to full-blown trespassing and smear campaigns, they operate not through law, but social coercion and narrative manipulation. Would you, as a landowner, have known how to respond? How many would have cracked under that kind of pressure? Instead, our protagonist plays a long game, legal, strategic, relentless. He doesn't yell, he drains the lake. He doesn't fight online. He arms himself with Maya Trent, a lawyer whose respect for rules is matched only by her taste for vengeance. And when the HOA escalates to court, it's not just their lawsuit that crumbles. It's their credibility, their forged documents, their entitlement. But what stands out most isn't the victory. It's what he builds after. Not a revenge project, but a restoration zone. Not exclusion, but earned trust. He teaches a community that property is not public just because it's nearby, and that neighborliness starts with respect, not assumption. This story teaches us that you don't have to scream to be powerful. When your rights are clear, your records are solid, and your resolve is quiet but absolute. You can turn a war into a garden. Let the law do the shouting. You just have to stand.